Okay, today is January 12th, Friday. This is Senate Transportation. We are going to be talking about the state standards. So take it away, Erin. Introduce yourself for the record.
Sounds great. For the record, I'm with the Vermont Agency of Transportation. I'm Erin Sisson, the Deputy Chief Engineer, and I'm here with Kara Jelinek, who's also involved in this process at the Agency of Transportation. Just for a little context setting to remind everybody with what we're looking at for the Vermont State Design Standards and where we've been in the past. The design standards were last published in 1997, so obviously more than a few years ago, but this really was accomplished by a broad multidisciplinary team of people at that time, engineers, planners, Federal Highway Administration, a lot of other partners across the state. And the intent of the standards were to basically provide clear technical direction for engineers and planners across the state of Vermont so that we were all designing to the same standards. And really to make sure that we're providing safe access and mobility to all users. And so even back in 1997, we were really focused on all users of the roadway network. And that is a theme that definitely is carrying into what we're working on today.
Meaning pedestrians, bicyclists?
Meaning, yeah, pedestrians, bicyclists, wheelchair accessibility, every potential user, trucks, buses, vehicles.
And all states have these standards, I'm assuming.
Yes, for different versions of very similar things. Yep. So the purpose of this update, besides the language that was in the T-bill last year, we've definitely all acknowledged that replacing and updating and modernizing these standards is important to keep pace with national best practice. Basically continue providing useful information and design standards for our transportation partners across the state. We want to build on previous efforts. So since 1997, there was an effort in 2015 that we refer to as M2D2, so multimodal design and delivery. We had worked with a consultant back then to sort of pull together an understanding of what we need to be doing better and how we can advance these standards. And then there were a couple of things in between now and then, but now we're really looking to moving that forward and on to what we're now calling the Vermont Multimodal Highway Guidance. So sort of moving from the terms of design standards to multimodal highway guidance. So it's really focusing on multiple modes and just making sure that the accommodation for all users is very prominent in the title, in the document, and throughout all of the guidance that it provides. So of course, the first goal is considering all users. And again, that's every user of the transportation network, no matter their capability or their mode choice. And then we really want to make sure that we're more clear about the integration of the transportation asset with the context of the location and the community, because the transportation asset isn't in and of itself an independent piece of the community. It's very integral. And so we want to make sure that all of the needs of the different communities across the state are able to grow in a way and accommodate the transportation needs of that particular context. So you might see a very different transportation asset in a downtown urban area than you would in a rural town or village that might have a very different need. One of the third,
I have a question, and that is, as part of this process, and I don't know maybe how many pieces of legislation, but one that does come to mind is Complete Streets that we passed. I'm assuming since 1997, we've probably passed other bills that might have a nexus to the guide. And so I'm just wondering, I'm assuming that all of that sort of got incorporated in the update.
Absolutely. So I have a couple of thoughts about that a little bit later, but what we're picturing is sort of an umbrella of multimodal design guidance that incorporates Complete Streets, and it incorporates all of the other initiatives and guidance that the state has. But then at the same time, we don't want to create redundancies in national manuals and national practices either. So the AASHTO design guidance that we have, if there's guidance and design standards that already exist, we want to make sure that we're leaning on that and not recreating the wheel per se, but we want to make sure that then Vermont can make sure that it's context sensitive. And if there's places that we need to clarify or expand, that we can. but this really will be an all-encompassing type framework, and then Complete Streets will be a component of it.
You're also required to update the complete streets.
Absolutely, and
This
you all,
year.
yep, and so you all will be hearing testimony. We have actually updated that guidance, and we've got a database that we're going to be presenting to you, I think, in the next couple of weeks.
It is up to the complete streets.
Yep,
It's been updated.
yep, it has. So we're going to come in. It might be scheduled for next week already.
I think it is.
Tuesday. So that will be a separate presentation, but it'll be more comprehensive on Complete Streets in and of itself. So something to look forward to. So
So when will this be completed?
you're cutting right to the chase. I love it, Senator Kitchell. So the only other things I wanted to say about the goals, if I may, is that we want to make sure, again, that it's context driven and that it's able to be used by not only the agency's designers and engineers, but that everybody across the state can access it, and it's very user friendly. So we're looking, instead of doing sort of your traditional engineering manual, we're doing a web-based platform, which I'm really excited about, and some other states have moved that direction as well. So it'll not only be an electronic document, but it'll be much more graphical and user-friendly and more like the story mapping settings that we're using these days. So it will be less of a traditional standardized guidance and more of a framework that, again, will encompass Complete Streets and everything else.
When you say development of the guidance, that's the same as saying development of the standards, or the guidance is just how to use the standards?
So we're shifting our language, I guess, from Vermont state design standards to multimodal highway guidance. So we want it to be more broad than, you know, the black and white engineering standards.
Is it looser? Is that like just guidance? You can do whatever you want. Here's our guidance.
It might depend on what the actual what we're referring to at any given time. So there might still be a standard in terms of if you've got this amount of, you know, AADT on the roadway and you've got this for a need, this might be your lane width, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of engineering judgment that we want to be able to go into it, and we want to be able to, again, make sure it's context sensitive. So we will be sort of understanding where we need to set strict standards and where it can be guidance that could be a little bit more flexible.
And that might help other multi-mode.
Exactly.
Although this is highway, so that's what my question really is. Will these standards also be applicable or have utility for trail development or bike ped, which you tend to think of highway as, you know, your
That's a
road
great
infrastructure,
point, yeah.
with automobiles or whatever, so.
Yeah, and I would say it's absolutely, again, it's intended to be all encompassing. And so the exact name of it, I joke with Kara a little bit. I would love to come up with something that's a little bit more, you know, we've been saying VMHG, but like, let's come up with something that sticks a little bit better and make sure that we don't get that misconception of, is it specifically for highways or is it for all users? So we want to make sure that that's.
And is it
clear going
all,
forward.
like if you were building a sidewalk, which I think usually you don't, but if you were this, there would be standards for sidewalks and how the curve.
There are,
is it-
I think.
There would at least be reference to where to find those standards. So again, we want to make sure this is pulling in all of the different, right now we've got bicycle and pedestrian, you know, guidance on its own and the Complete Streets guidance. And we want to sort of use this as a way to bring all of those pieces together so that this is one-stop shopping, so that someone can come here, be pointed to resources for sidewalk dimensions or roadway or shared use path dimensions or whatever it is. So this will be all-encompassing for sure.
This is a more comprehensive title
Yes, it is.
by Transportation State Design Standards. Transportation is much more than the highway.
Right. No, that's good. That's good
So
feedback.
I think actually this is probably.
They titled the slide for, you have a good name for your slide, and
All right, we'll revert. We'll revert back. We'll
Your
consider
slide
that.
title could be replaced for Vermont highway.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that
Yeah.
feedback. We'll make sure we do some wordsmithing to make sure it's all inclusive and make sure that that's just really
It sounds
clear.
like it is inclusive, it's just
It
the
is.
title would appear that it's much more narrow. But
So we'll keep working on that. I absolutely hear your point. So in terms of schedule, you asked Senator Kitchell, we just got a consultant on board, and we're really excited that our consultant team is a team that is local, but they're also partnered with somebody who has national expertise in doing exactly the same thing, updating state design guidance and manuals to be more comprehensive, more up to pace with the rest of the country. And so we've got a really great team that's going to be working with us. Phase one, we sort of broke it out into phases, and we really wanted to start with making sure that we define the exact scope of the project and that we define how our stakeholder engagement is going to look. Because as you can recall, and Rob Kidd is right next to me here, we've got a lot of advocacy groups across the state who are really invested, as you are, in making sure that this is all encompassing and just making sure that we're meeting the needs of the communities, of the context, of all different users. And so we really want to make sure that we're clear with how the different stakeholder groups are going to be involved from the very early parts of this process throughout the entire thing. And so we want to make sure that all of the voices are heard. And then at the end of the day, that we really get a good comprehensive document that's a useful tool for designers and planners across the state. So identifying exactly what that's going to look like and how their involvement is going to be incorporated throughout is going to be a really important baseline to set. Along with the stakeholder engagement, we really want to make sure that the goal and the vision is well thought out, and then reviewing existing practices and best practices across the country. We want to make sure that in our existing manuals and guidance that we understand where the gaps are, what the needs are to address, and then we can work towards filling those with the best practices that we've seen from some of our other partners. And then how do we minimize those redundancies in what, for example, the state design standards might be saying compared to what AASHTO manuals already say? And how do we make sure that we're not recreating anything, but we're just pointing people to the best references that might already exist? So again, really just making sure that this is comprehensive and not redundant.
So is it dramatically going to change?
I think so, yeah.
You do?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, I guess the fundamental question is what difference does it make in terms of, you know, how projects are designed and compared to what we're doing now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me that I think about is just, you know, I want to make sure all of the designers and engineers are really understanding the context and then thinking about, and this is the way that AASHTO is going with some of their design too, you know, what is the minimum width, for example, that we might prefer? What's the minimum that we can possibly do, but then what's the maximum that we can do, and what's the maximum that we would prefer, so that there's sort of this judgment that they can use engineering judgment and understand the constraints of the area to sort of bring their engineering perspective into it, but have enough flexibility so that if the needs are different in different places, there's opportunity for them not to just necessarily look in this graph and say, well, if this, then that. It can be a little bit more flexible so that we're making sure it's a conscientious decision with engineering judgment.
Oh, engineering tautologies.
Do you trust engineers?
You've got more than one sitting in the room.
Sure. I think we have a lot of actually native engineers.
Yeah.
When you think about, you know, people in the local business and communities, and they're quite, Irene proved that.
Right.
A lot of local engineering.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yes, I think the title should be, no, actually, I think it should be Vermont, and you've got it here, because you're using the term multimodal, which then gives it broader, so I would say Vermont Multimodal Transportation Design Standards. I got rid of highway.
I love it. You're doing our work for us.
Yeah. She's a consultant.
Yeah.
So fire the consultants and.
And we'll work with Senator Kitchell. So that's, we're phase one will be done, you know, within this year, and then we'll move on to the phase two and phase three. So we've been saying 2 to 3 years is our time frame for completion of this, and it really will be. It's much needed. It will be a big improvement.
So that's 2 to 3 years. That's quite a bit of time, and you've got a lot of projects in between. So it's just sort of a question about how some of this can be advanced or anticipated in what you have in the books, as opposed to all of a sudden you're going to apply the standards.
Absolutely.
You know, when they're fully developed.
Oh yeah, that's a good. Do you wait till they're fully developed, or you roll them out as parts of them? Like if you had standards on roundabouts, you would apply that before the whole standards for that.
Well, I would say because again, this is building on, we're already thinking about all users through Complete Streets and through other efforts. We're already doing so much of this that we're sort of shifting the mindset as we're developing the standards. So while we might not be able to specifically point to something and say, thou shalt start using this until it's complete, we're definitely working on just shifting the mindset a little bit and making sure that we're ingraining this in our design. So I would say it's an ongoing process, but once we do finish this, it'll be just a lot easier to use it consistently across the state.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, of course.
That's,
Any other
you're
questions?
done? No.
Great,
Senator Ingalls, do you have
No,
anything?
thank you.
great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've used all my creativity.
Well, we appreciate
Yeah, you're
that.
way ahead.
Thank you, Cindy.
We have Danville Consulting.
I still gotta figure out how to get 2 more segments to a sidewalk on the route to improvement and then a mud hole.
I haven't tried. I can try it, and if not, we can do the same thing.
Oh,
Everyone has your slides.
Okay.
oh, inflation impacts? Is that you?
It is.
Oh, that's riveting.
Did you cause it? No pressure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, who cares about money, right?
I tend to. Oh.
Yeah, well, that's a good introduction.
Wow, look at that photograph on the front here. What is that?
That is the construction of the original.
Mic and speaker. Speaker and mic. Speaker and mic.
I'm just looking at that photograph.
It's the original something. That's my original something. Yes, he's working on that.
I'm
Okay.
using my
I
microphone.
wasn't sure where it was coming from.
Yeah, it's me, it's my fault.
I know, that's.
Oh, I know what the answer is. Inflation means that you can do less. The same amount of money.
You on break?
We're just on technical break.
Okay, I'll catch you hopefully later today.
Okay, good, I'll look for you.
We know inflation makes projects.
Well, you don't have to have it, we all have
I made
it.
you the co-host, so you should be able to share.
You don't need to share, although I guess people that are on YouTube don't see it. What do they see when I don't even know.
There you go.
Here we are.
There you go.
Now we know, now we can look at that photograph.
Now we can be told what it's the original construction of the bridge across the
Did you-
No, it's the original drawbridge from the 50s.
Oh, another drawbridge.
Another
He
drawbridge.
loves pictures of
Is that
drawbridge.
Boston with a hard hat?
So you're talking about, this is the Grand Isle
It is,
drawbridge?
from
We only have
1950.
we only have one drawbridge in the state.
Yeah, we certainly only have one now. At some point, there may have been another, but I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know that there was one.
I did
Every county should.
I did go to Grand Isle this summer.
You told us.
And the bridge was up. I actually saw that new bridge at work.
Did you get out and take a picture?
No, I don't take pictures.
For your Instagram account?
Yeah, right. Here I am.
She's on X.
Here I am, right. Here I am in Luxembourg Gardens. Here I am. I hate that when people do that. First of all, it's an advertisement. Why don't you come and, rob my house? Jeez. I mean, I think people are really, who cares?
Okay.
If
We're
you're
gonna learn a lot today, folks. I'm just telling you. Chains on fire.
I'm telling you, it's Friday.
Friday deal.
Yeah.
The chief engineer is gonna bring us down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, Jeremy.
So does Erin work for you?
She does,
Okay. And Kara works for you too?
she does.
Okay. Well, no wonder you look
How
so
many
good.
other,
Exactly. It is not of my own creation.
how many other folks in the engineering department?
So within the highway division, there's about 330 employees. They're not all engineers. We've got technicians, we've got right away.
There isn't an engineering division, you're just all within the highway division.
Well, there's engineers spread throughout.
Right.
Michelle's team has within rail and aviation, there's engineers. I don't think there's any in finance administration.
So they're just mixed in doing the work.
Exactly, yeah, and
Okay.
maintenance has a couple, so. Okay, well, thank you, senators. My name is Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer for the Vermont Agency of Transportation, and joining me this morning is Bradley Kuchenberger, the Chief Financial Officer for the agency. And we wanted to provide an update on some of the inflation impacts that are having on our construction projects. Obviously, a lot's changed since the 1950 construction of the dock bridge. So this first slide just shows our annual budget for AOT since fiscal year 18. And you can see that in 2023, excuse me, state fiscal year 23, we had a 23% increase due principally to the IIJA in our budget.
So that's very helpful because we were trying to get a handle the other day. So this is really.
Yeah, on a macro level, this shows the scale of
Yeah.
the growth,
Yeah.
really.
And you're probably gonna get to it, but when's the burn rate? When's it done? When's it start coming down the other way?
So it's a 5-year bill, and there is some inflation. I don't know what the year over year is.
Yeah, there's an inflationary factor on our formula funds, so it grows a little bit over time. When we were anticipating the IIJA, we kind of saw it more as a bell curve because of the amount of discretionary grant opportunities there are. So the first couple of years, you're seeing kind of a ramp up, and then you're going to see kind of an increase over probably through state fiscal 26, 27 to a peak when we're fully implementing all
And
the
we'll also be a
discretionary
slow
grants that we're
Or
able
cliff,
to.
I guess.
And then it'll revert back to like a new formulaic normal.
You're not expecting a cliff.
Not so much a cliff.
Yeah.
What,
An engineer design.
There needs to be a high water mark settled out.
Yeah.
After it gets to.
We don't want a landslide.
Oh,
the conventional wisdom is that it would settle in the future years in some range in between this point and this point. The conventional wisdom being that in the history of the surface transportation bills, the formula funding, once it's reached a certain point, never goes or has not gone below that. But what is included in the IIJA that is probably less likely to continue in perpetuity is the general fund programs, like the large bridge programs, and a lot of the additional discretionary grant opportunities that we were discussing last time may not continue in the next surface transportation bill.
But by then, we would have really, we've done a number of very big bridge projects,
Right.
so we might be in pretty good shape when that money goes away. I mean, the interstate bridges have been extremely expensive, the one in Brattleboro.
Yeah, so I think,
Over the Black, you know.
right, I mean, I think the condition of our network, we won't ever be at a place where like, okay, we're good for 40 or 50 years. You know, we've certainly talked a lot about our culvert program, and that's unfortunately going to be expensive. And, you know, the traveling public won't see a brand new, 1,000-foot bridge, but just the nature of the construction, very deep construction, it is expensive. So,
well, just the nature of the smaller bridges. I mean, when you start talking about, I know there was a project in Sheffield that was kind of concerning. It wasn't even a bridge. It was more of a pass through underneath culvert
Sure.
type
Exactly.
project. I mean, with the age of the interstates, we don't need to have those big bridge projects to put us in deficits.
yeah, and so when I first started 20 years ago, we were talking about this wave that was going to hit us, right? So if you look at a culvert, general rule of thumb is a culvert has a 60-year life, right? And if we look at our bridges, general rule of thumb, we can get 100 years out of those. Now, unfortunately for us, those two events coincide with the 27 flood and building the interstate in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
So to your point, Senator Ingles, the need is absolutely not going to go away.
No, we know that even now in our unfunded obligations on the highway side, it's a couple $100 million.
So this provides a little context of just where we are today.
Yeah, I'll just say, we're trying to say a story. So on this slide, we're saying this is what Vermont received. And then I think we could go to the next slide. And we're trying to demonstrate, I put a table on here that shows that not just Vermont, obviously, but the IIJA impact on the spending opportunities for public sector was very significant, and especially in the Northeast region.
We got more than New Hampshire?
Don't tell us.
So if you take everything per capita, the Northeast, given its mixture of infrastructure and population density, received more per capita spending, of course, in a smaller geographic area. And we also compete for contracting services with many of our neighboring states and partners. So the idea is to highlight the fact that not only do we have more money to spend, which influences the market in Vermont, but regionally and nationally, the same inputs are having the same outputs, but it's even more exaggerated in our region as opposed to some national regions. And I think Jeremy then has some data that proves that out, how inflation is impacting our construction pricing specifically.
So this is like a good news, bad news slide, right? It's good we're getting the money, but it does strain the resources within Vermont. And that unfortunately does drive the inflation. So, and clearly we are getting more than most in our.
What about materials? Obviously in labor, then, I mean, that's probably an ongoing cost, but.
Absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing
So everybody's-
is escalation in every component, right? So there's equipment, labor, materials. Labor, certainly everybody's aware of that. Materials are certainly an issue, and then equipment as well, and we'll get into that. So this is a slide from Federal Highway, and Federal Highway has created what they call.
Well, combined per capita, didn't we?
We did very well, yeah. And I think historically we do well, right? We've been blessed by our congressional delegation, and we've made a compelling story that our formula funds have historically done well compared to our neighbors. So Federal Highway created the National Highway Construction Cost Index, and there's a link at the bottom of the slide that in your free time you can go fool around with it. But basically it started in 2003, and so the benchmark being 1.0 is 2003. And so I just tried to grab a portion of the graph that sort of is near-term memory. And so what we can see is that from Q2 started roughly at 1.6, and where we are today is about 3. So if you distill that down even to a shorter time period, what we're seeing is a 54% increase between Q4 of 2020, which obviously still was somewhat COVID impacted, but nonetheless to the Q1 of 23 resulted in a 54% increase in construction costs nationally.
What is the axis on this graph? I can't even read it now.
So the bottom is time, and then the vertical is the actual indices, right? So again, with 1.0 being 2003, we start at Q2 of 2016, roughly 1.6, I believe it is, and where we get to on the.
As a percent increase of what?
Oh,
Of all construction
All
costs.
construction.
I think that comes to the next, what's included in those costs.
Yeah. And
That's a lot,
it's a lot.
54%.
Yes, very much so. And so,
Means we're getting half as much for our money.
Yeah.
yeah, so the value per dollar spent has gone down drastically. And so when we talk about $100 million bridge or a $50 million bridge, go back to 4 years ago, that's a $25 or $50 million bridge.
And are these three the biggest ones, asphalt, iron, steel, concrete, or those are just the?
Those are just common products that we pulled out. So this is a slide from the American Road Transportation Builders Association. And so this is a separate indices from what Federal Highway keeps. So both AGC and ARPA have their own chief economists that track various things. Much of this data is pulled from the federal government, whether it be Bureau of Labor Statistics or Consumer Price Index and things like that.
What's the first line again? So-
Diesel fuel.
Diesel.
Yeah.
So faint.
And so what this shows is essentially the inflation. The orange bar is from 2012 to 2020, and then the blue bar is 2021 to 2022. And so what you see in all cases is a significant increase in inflation in the preceding 2 years versus the 8 years preceding that. And so, you know, what you'll see on the next slide is things were predictably going upward, but at a slope and then a significant increase. And so,
Do you have labor at all? in here?
so labor is not included in this.
Yeah,
Okay, so this is strictly the cost of materials.
and has labor been around similar?
Well,
So I think,
if you look at the bottom on it, I would think architectural and engineering services would be labor, and that is
That's
only.
not the labor.
right, that's the consultants,
Right,
so,
but you look at that's quite modest
yeah.
on that piece of the labor side.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally speaking, we have had conversation with contractors and especially in Vermont, it's a challenge to keep the labor force and it's a bit competitive. So I have heard from some contractors that year over year, they'll give their staff a 6% raise just to keep them.
I would
Because-
think that the way it's going right now, that you're gonna see higher labor costs for quite some time, but we should start to see some pressures on inflationary product come down. I mean, I'm talking to some companies and stuff, and there is some real concern, materials that were hard to get or almost impossible to get are all of a sudden showing up in time. So hopefully we see some balancing out here. I mean, labor is gonna be high for a long time. We don't have enough.
Once the wages go up, they
Right,
don't. you
there,
don't
right,
get away.
and exactly what you're saying. The companies I'm talking to are doing incentives of any way they can do to keep their workforce.
Exactly. And just to touch on your point about materials, the other thing about 2020 is not only were we seeing some inflationary impacts, but obviously COVID shut down some manufacturing facilities.
Right.
So the whole supply stream was interrupted, which compounded, you know, some of the
A
price.
lot depends on materials, how much labor is involved in the creation of those
Right.
materials
Right,
as well.
right. I mean, at every step, there's labor, trucking, transport,
Right.
manufacture, et cetera. So I just pulled out 3 common materials. Asphalt, you know, 2.3 or negative 2.3 to 48.2. Iron and steel, negative 1.0, all the
What
way
slide
up.
is this on this slide or?
Yeah, on this slide. So to the left,
Oh,
right? So there's some specific examples that I just pulled off the grid there. Iron and steel, we saw a very big increase, 42.4% increase. And then concrete products went from 2.6 to 10.4. Now, if you combine all of that, this is what the graph looks like. And again, this is over a longer duration with a baseline from December of 14 being 100. And you can see that to roughly June of 2020, it was about a 7% increase over that time frame. Since July of 2020 to July of 2022, we've seen a 40% increase there. Now, we have seen some moderation of that. Again, the supply streams from COVID have normalized. But as Senator Kitchell pointed out, labor is not going to ever go down. And to some extent, there is still inflation that's going to affect our materials. And really what we're seeing with the downward, I won't say trend, but just sort of that normalization is generally the effects of COVID being behind us. So those were national trends, and I just wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about some VTrans specific thing. And this is a little bit of a cluttered piece, but so this is a graph showing our pricing with 2018 being the baseline. So 0.0 would be 2018. And these are calendar year bid prices. So this is all of the bids we receive. So common excavation, which is the orange line, kind of in the middle there at 2023, this orange line, that's our most used item probably. Virtually every project has common excavation, right? It's digging dirt. And on an annual basis, we'll receive tens of thousands of bids for common excavation across the program. And so if we look at the average price, sort of a 3-year average from 2018 to 2020, and compare it to a 3-year average from 2021 to 2023, we see some interesting things. So in total, there is a 36% increase on common excavation. Now, common excavation doesn't actually have very much labor associated with it. So that's fuel, equipment, principally. But really what I wanted to show here, aside from, sure, go ahead.
Sorry, give us an example of what common excavation would be.
Digging a hole.
Okay, of anybody, you finding somebody with a machine to come in that could work within the state rules and then dig a hole.
Yep, so like I said, we've received roughly tens of thousands, like 50,000 bids a year for somebody saying, I'll dig that hole. And so that's digging the dirt out of the hole, loading it into a dump truck and taking it someplace. So it's the most basic thing we do. Again, not a lot of labor associated with that. You might have a truck driver, you might have an equipment operator, maybe a grade foreman at most, but it's light touch on a labor perspective.
So you're almost gonna see in that figure right there, the real cost of inflation of common people, of whatever. It's a cost of them having to pay more to repair their trucks, more for their insurance, more for their fuel.
Yeah.
And probably not a lot of labor.
Yeah, and just parts and I mean everything. Every touch point has gone up. Now the big sort of takeaway that I'm trying to express on this slide is, yes, we've got a 36% increase, but again, if we take the standard deviation, so as you may know, a standard deviation is a measure of volatility. Okay, so if we take 2018 to 2020 and compare that to 2021 through 2023, there's been 119% increase in standard deviation. And what I'm trying to sort of stress there is that our ability to predict what the pricing is just significantly impacted. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, right? So risk, increased costs. And I think just general volatility in the market, contractors have to try to price that risk and that volatility.
I'm connecting this back to the auditors. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, well, and the estimates and projects and then actual what it comes in, and this kind of environment where you have that volatility.
Yeah.
You're gonna experience it.
And that's where if you look at some of our, right, and that's where if you look at, you know, some of our bid estimates, and you see the bid prices, and you're like, how could you miss it so badly? Well, this is why. Just because there's so much volatility, we can't just look at our historic 2- and 5-year bid averages, add a little bit of inflation, and call it good. Because the volatility, especially on multi-year projects, you know, contractors being asked to lock in a price and carry that price for 2 or 3 years, their risk aversion is baked into that, and that's very difficult for us to predict.
Signs.
So traffic signs.
I wonder if deputy auditors listening.
Yes, he watches the owner.
We'll probably get a text soon.
Yeah, so again, we're seeing a 66% increase in signs in the price of signs from 2018 to 2023. But again, the volatility is just something that's very difficult. 406% increase in standard deviation between the 3-year average leading up to 2020 and the 3-year average after 2020. Line striping, again, very, very common item. Just the graph, you can see the volatility there. A 43% increase for a 4-inch white line. Obviously, those are very, very prevalent. And these are durable, so these would be new projects that are.
It's just amazing though, the precipitous increase and then the precipitous drop. I mean, you got almost a triangle, a pyramidal.
And I think that's the COVID effect, right? So post-COVID, people weren't sure about their supply chains. White lines, durable white lines, I will say, were impacted significantly from the weather event in Texas 3 years ago. They had that deep freeze that really wreaked havoc on the petrochemical industry down there. And so this is partially impacted by that as well. So there you had two pretty significant national events in COVID and that deep freeze.
Did somebody ask about white lines?
I was just gonna say, Senator Chittenden was asking a question about what type of reflection, was a reflection put into the paint or?
Yeah, I
do you
guess
remember
the
what that was?
constituents that thought that the Vermont wasn't, basically our paint wasn't as reflective enough. Or like said, that we don't use reflective
So
materials in our paint.
there's two categories of paint. One we call durable and one we call just regular paint. It's just regular paint. The durables are made up of multiple things. It could be epoxy, it could be polyurea, and those are significantly longer lasting, and they will hold the retroreflectivity longer.
Is the retroreflectivity built into the material?
Yeah, so
applied to it?
so it's baked in. So when they lay this material down, you've got the base paint, right, whether it be epoxy or polyurea, but then they mix glass beads in that, and so those glass beads provide a lot of the retroreflectivity.
So we do that, but sometimes we just need to get a line down and it's just white paint.
Well, but even that, there are optics
Okay.
within that.
Special.
It's just they don't hold up as well. Right? So they may go down at the same, but a plow will go over paint and damage it much more significantly than
So
durables.
getting back to standards, design standards, are there different choices? I mean, I guess some people must think we're using a cheaper paint or a less effective paint than other. Is there a standard for what you have for reflective materials in your design?
So for new construction, for durable, within the spec, we have a minimum retroreflectivity value, okay? For the paint, what you see more often is paint. So every year we paint the interstate system, state highway system, class 1 and 2 town highways. And for that, just because of the volume, we just use paint, and we do it every year. So that's, I'll say, a policy or a decision on how to expend our funds.
Because the cost differential is
Significant, yeah, it's a significant price difference. Now, when we do a new paving project or a new bridge project, because we're there and we're making that investment, we use durables.
How long does that durable in?
It's variable, I'll just say 3 to 4 years. And then it depends if it's ground in or if it's laid on top.
It depends.
Yeah, it depends, right? The inside of the corner is gonna last less than the outside of the corner, right? But let's just say 3 years on a
And then
ballpark.
after that, it's gonna be paint.
After that,
Until you'd have to redo the rest.
Exactly.
Okay.
I can imagine that a lot of these temporary lines, that you're just painting.
Yeah, the temporary lines are
Those
just
are
paint.
nothing, and then a lot of people might be seeing that and saying, oh, no,
Potentially.
it's different.
Yeah.
Because you have a lot more of that going on than what you've had in the past.
Yeah.
Until you get it.
I think the other thing that is probably influencing this too is the headlights now are so extreme that they just wipe out so much of the vision.
Yeah, well, and I think there is a lot of glare, right? I mean, you see those white, blue
Yeah.
lights and things. So I think there's a number of factors that will influence the sort of user experience on the roadway.
So Bradley, do you have a presentation, or are you are you on the agenda to add color to this presentation?
No,
This is a
we did
code,
it together,
No, he's
so-
here.
But you also are on the agenda for the different items.
Yeah, for the
He's double
budget
booked.
adjustment
He's double
right
booked.
after this.
Well, we were hoping to get that by 10, so I'm just
Okay,
making awareness at the time.
Sure, so I'll quickly, another example, paving. Now,
Fine, yeah, we just have to finish this by 10, is that what you're
No,
saying?
well, according to the agenda, we'd have to get finished Bradley by 10.
okay, I will be very quick.
Well,
That was possible.
You have more to add to this?
Yeah, he's gonna talk
Well,
about.
for the budget adjustment, not for inflation.
Not for
Well,
inflation,
then
no.
you're down at 10:45 for budget. You're doing fine, Andy.
Oh, okay, you're on the agenda for just helping this, but later you'll talk about the budget.
I think he's here for just,
Color.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about
Right,
it.
so Bradley does the money in, and I do the money
He
out.
adds more reflection to the line.
There's economic factors, and then there's more specific construction-related factors, so if, I think it's a good team
So I-
system we have set up here.
yeah, so actually, the intent is that Jeremy would do the bulk of the presentation. We would
Because
just
it's more
supplement.
specific to.
Okay, so
So we're doing fine,
Okay,
that's what I was-
because we're down to,
I've only got a couple more slides anyway.
Maybe.
Yeah, so
Hey.
paving, again, we didn't, well, not again. So this is a little bit interesting, and I think there's a causal effect here. So we actually saw a 4% decrease in paving price. Now, it should be noted that we did make some spec changes, so this isn't a direct apples to apples comparison. But I just wanted to present the data. And again, we saw a fairly significant drop in standard deviation. We actually saw a 17% decrease in standard deviation. And I think we know why. So the paving industry has two things that the majority of our other items don't have. One is a commodity adjustment. So we index the price of fuel and we index the price of asphalt. So any significant paving project removes that risk. And to just give you an idea, to the left is what we pay out for price adjustments on asphalt from 2019 through 2023, and then price adjustments on fuel from 2019 to 2023. So again, on those two sort of risks, we help take that risk out and mitigate it. So they don't necessarily build that into their bid.
that looks like Route 2, doesn't it? And
No, that's Route 100 in Stockbridge, Rochester.
Looks like that curve as you go around in the barn is long and.
But so this is just for the cost of the asphalt or the cost?
Well, this is the delta in the cost of the asphalt and fuel from the time it was bid to the time it was used, essentially. And so across all of our projects, as an example, in 2023, we paid $2.8 million in those adjustments. And
We'll be calculating the slope of the line here before long.
so
But if they had to have more materials, like it seemed like the contractor on Route 2 probably didn't use more asphalt, but like had to lay down material a couple times, it seemed, because it would flood it out like 4 times.
So, stuff that's flooded out, yes, we would pay for that. Just natural deterioration because it rained, sort of a normal expected event that they just had to regrade and reshape it. That's part of their
So they
maintenance.
they say, hey, this extra cost is because of the flood, not because we messed up.
Yeah, so on July 11th, we said, okay, we've obviously got some damage to the project, and we started tracking
So
that.
what did that do to the Route 2 project? I think it was original estimate around 20 million to rebuild the road
Yeah.
bed and pave. And it did get flooded a couple times.
Yeah,
So
I don't have those figures exactly what that damage
and-
was.
that would be, obviously, there'd be quite a bit of inflation.
This committee cares a lot about the Route 2.
Understood, for obvious reason, I understand.
It's kind of like, it needs to be the new drawbridge.
Okay.
I think it's in very good shape.
It is, no, it was all done.
Yeah.
But it was.
Well, and we're not done, right? So we've got a second section
know, I
coming,
know.
and what appears done is actually not the finished product.
Right.
We'll come through and put another lift of pavement over
Yeah,
that.
You've got up the cabin section, up to the Danville line,
Yeah, so we've got significant more.
up to,
Again, Bill doesn't get it. They just-
No, Andy put a stop to that.
So,
They
so,
gotta know.
so again, just, we've got the price adjustments, but the other thing we also have within the paving world is we have pay factor adjustments. So, we will either pay or deduct money based on their performance. Again, that's sort of unique to the paving industry. So obviously we recognize we needed to get better with our bid histories, and again, historic practice was to look at the 2 and 5 year bid histories, strictly rearward looking. It became clear we didn't do that. So Bradley's team put this together when we program a project and come up with an initial estimate, knowing construction won't occur until 2026, 2027. This just provides our project managers a little bit of guidance to get their estimates a little bit better. The other thing we're doing is this spring, we will be advertising a chief estimator position, which will again look at the producer price index, consumer price index, some of the national trends to help augment this. Right? Bradley's taking strictly the consumer price index here, but there's probably other factors.
You know, just for the bid or to evaluate bids, both.
More project estimates.
Yeah, so this
When
is
they're developing, when the project managers are developing the project, we're tracking estimates along the way, which of course impact our budgeting decisions and what projects get included in capital program and whatnot. And we want to try to be as precise as we can, just given that there's multiple years of estimate
Right,
and then
budget
economic
tight
factors in it.
So it's our hope that the chief estimator will be able to be a little bit more precise and take more inputs.
What do you have to have for expertise to be a chief estimator?
So my initial,
Are you
well,
an engineer? Are you both?
I think you're more of a statistician.
Economist.
Yeah. So I think, you're gonna take a lot of the national indices, whatever they be, consumer price index, producer price index, commodity prices for fuel, and try to distill that down. I think it's partially art and partially science.
Yeah, well, you think about companies, they have to have people that are doing the bids. And those can be,
Yeah.
those can be pretty crucial.
Absolutely, and that's where we started, where they need to bid that risk in, right? So they are way better at analyzing their risks than we are, just because they know what goes into their projects, they know what risks exist, and so they bake that bid in, but it's not clear to us exactly how they do it, and certainly across the industry, they all do it differently. And so, all we have is this end number for all of our unit bid items, but they know more exactly what goes into
You
that.
just need to hire one of their people then.
Well, so believe it or not, there is.
I mean, that's where the
Yeah.
expertise, if you're,
Right.
if you're not bidding
Right.
well, I mean, that could really, the impact on a company is enormous.
Right, and we
That's
do.
their job.
Yeah, and we do have some contracting methods where we will hire what's called an independent cost estimator, and they are generally former contractors to help look at the contractor's bid price and provide us a little bit more insight to that. Any other questions? That's my presentation.
I feel like I've had a calculus course.
Well, it's bad news, but it's good news that you're paying attention to it and trying to figure out how you can deal with it.
And I think the big takeaway is, aside from the inflation, our biggest challenge right now is the volatility.
Yeah.
And that's,
So what do we have out there right now for mechanisms to protect for some of these bids that have been out there that got bid in those long-term, in those expensive years? I mean, are we stuck with those bids?
yes. Now, some of the bids, some of the bigger projects, they do have these commodity price adjustments, which does help reflect the current state. But by and large, if you're bidding a 3-year, 4-year project, the bid you give us in 2022 must be held until 2026, for instance.
So that works for and against us.
It works for and against us, just like the commodity adjustments work for and against the contractor, right? Because you can see on some of those slides, they were negatives, where their net was contractors paid us, right? So in 2020, for instance, fuel prices went down drastically. So if they bid a job in 2018, 2019, performed the work in 2020, they generally would pay us because of the decrease in those commodities.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Okay, we are gonna have a break.
And then we have, then we're finishing up on,
Most people have other questions for our engineers.
No, very informative, very nice
We're gonna go do some
presentation.
Engineering.
you've got, you have a lot of, female engineers in the agency and what is generally perceived to be a very male-dominated, area. of
What is the
employment.
percentage?
I'm just
Or just the
wondering
two
what-
that are in here?
Oh, no.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's definitely not the two. I don't know that we've broken out the engineering ranks.
Because Ann Gamble's still there and
Yeah,
does a good job.
and Carolyn Coda's the head of the structures program, and then certainly we have innumerable project managers and lower level
It
engineers.
probably helps to have some to get more, I would assume.
Yeah,
And so where did you go?
University of Vermont, both of us, yeah.
You did too? Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, pretty good program there. And we do a lot of outreach through the schools and just try to have awareness and get.
And a number of, were Vermont Tech as
Yeah.
well.
Norwich.
And you work with even younger age, like just to get them
High
interested in
school,
it.
middle school,
Right.
yeah, we do a lot of
Good.
Well, that was something I never aspired to.